Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Samach Aleph, and with that we will finish the fourth chapter. We'll have a nice review at the end that Rashi does of all the cases that we've seen. I mentioned that it's a little bit of a challenging chapter because we keep having case after case after case. It's challenging in the sense that there's no real summary, so Rashi is going to do that for us at the end of this chapter. What Rashi is not going to do, which is the other challenging element, which was we said that in each of these cases there's differences of opinion among the commentaries, or there's at least a number of issues. There's difference of opinion. For that we're not going to get Rashi's summary for, because Rashi is going to give it all to us, his summary through his prism, through the prism of Rashi's commentary, not necessarily bringing, or not at all bringing, all the other opinions about it. So we'll at least get a partial summary, at least according to Rashi, of what the 6 basic cases are in this chapter, and what the law is for each of those, categories of cases. So in the meantime, let's start with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is talking about, and we mentioned part of this Mishnah yesterday, so somebody says somebody goes over to their Gentile friend, or someone not necessarily their friend, and says, listen, you have grapes, you have a wine press, I want to make grapes, I want to make wine from your grapes, I want to sell it to a Jew. I can get more money for selling to a Jew because the process is more complicated because you have to make sure that there's no yenesach or anything. So we'll go into business, right? I'll make it so it's good for the Jews. The Jews will buy it. And when I get the money, I'll pay you, okay, when I sell it. So so the Jew prepares it all in a way that's kosher. In other words, again, kosher meaning no non-Jew got in contact with it. We don't mean kashrus, we mean as relating to the laws of Yenesach. V'nono b'rishuto u'bebayit hapatuach le'rishut harabi. So now, after the wine is all ready, the Gentile keeps it because it's not yet sold. So they keep it in the idolatrous property, and it's a house. This is case number 1, where it's patuach le'rishut harabi. Okay, it's not actually, it seems like some of the commentaries say this isn't really in the idolatr's house. It's in a house that the idolater owns but isn't living in. Okay, it's not where they're living. It's in some storage area that belongs to the idolater. If there's both idolaters and Jews living in that city, mutal, why is it permitted? Because the assumption is, since the wine is stored there, people will notice if the idolater goes in there and perhaps touches the wine. So the idolater is going to make sure not to go in there or not to touch the wine so that people don't see. And therefore, it's okay, because there's no concern of them coming in and tampering with it, right? And maybe offering it up as a libation to their gods. But if it's a mostly Gentile city, then it's going to be forbidden because there aren't Jews that are going to be noticing. So what are you going to do in that case? Well, you put up a shomer, you put up someone to watch. They don't need to sit there 24/7. As long as they come and go, this is where we get the laws of mashgiach, right? The mashgiach isn't there 24/7. But since they never know at what point the mashgiach could be coming in, they protect themselves, right? They make sure not to do it. They don't want to mess up their business opportunity, right? It's worth too much money for them to be able to sell this to the Jews for a high price. So it's in their interest, and therefore, as long as someone's coming and checking on them, it's okay. Because, right, they don't care to offer it as a libation if no one's going to notice. There's no harm done. When people don't know, people don't see, right, won't harm them. But if people will see, either because it's a house open to the public domain and there's Jews living in the city, or if not, then they need to basically have a guard there. Or, like we said, a guard that comes and goes. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omeo. Shimon ben Elazar disagrees about something we have no idea what right now. We're going to only get to that at the end of the Gemara. Rishut of Dekochoy Machati. The domains of idolaters is considered like one. Okay, we don't know what this means. We're going to put this aside. Same kind of case. Somebody is preparing wine so that they can sell to Jews, but it belongs to the idolater. And it's put in the idolater's possession. And the idolater wrote, we saw this yesterday. I already got paid for this, even if the idolater didn't get paid yet. But if the idolater wrote, this is paid for, mutal, then we can assume that the idolater is not going to come anywhere near it because it's as if the idolater is giving up all rights to it and say, this isn't mine even. Happens to be in my possession, but it's not mine. So it's totally fine. We don't have to worry they're going to come in contact with it. Aval and Yurtzei Israel Yotzi, but if the case was where if the Jew were to want to take it, and the idolater would not let the Jew take it when the Jew is ready to take it unless the Jew pays money, this happened in Beit Shan and they forbade it because they said that basically means that the idolater views this as the idolater's property. And therefore, we're going to be concerned. Now the Gemara wants to deal at first with a very simple issue, which is this where the door opens to the public domain. If the door opens to the public domain, that's a concern that people will see, right? And that's actually going to make it better here, because we're not worried there's going to be any libations going on. So but now they say, wait a minute. That was only in a city that was predominant, right? They had Jews and idolaters mixed. But if it's predominantly idolaters, then no. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Also, even in a predominantly idolatrous city, still you have the Jews were peddlers. They would go in and out of cities all the time. So there's always Jews going in and out of there. So why wouldn't we say, oh, those Jews will make sure, right? They'll be checking, they'll see. And therefore the idolater will be concerned that they might notice. So Amar Shmuel has to give an ukimta to the Mishnah and say we must be talking about Be'ir sheyesh la delatayim u'bariach. It's a city that has locks on it. And the peddlers only come in when they unlock the gates. And when they unlock the gates to let the peddlers in, everybody knows that they unlock the gates. So at that point, the idolater will say, okay, well, for these few hours, I won't go near the wine. But it doesn't prevent the idolater from going near the wine during other hours when the gates are locked. And that's the way you have to understand the Mishnah, according to Shmuel, otherwise it doesn't really make sense. Amar Rav Yosef, v'chalon ki reshut harabim dami. Now we're going to talk about this opening to the public domain. Comes Rav Yosef and he says, if you have a window, it's no different than the door opening to the public domain. If the window faces the public domain, it's the same thing. The idolater's window faces the public domain where the wine is. You don't have to worry about it, because people will see. Again, assuming there's Jews in the city. V'ashpa ki reshut harabim dami. If there's a garbage dump right outside the door, then also you don't have to worry about it because people come to the garbage dump. So it might not open to the public domain, but it opens to an area where a lot of people come. Or dikla, kireshut harabim dami, even a palm tree, because the owner of the palm tree climbs up the palm tree to get the dates. And if somebody climbs up to get the dates, they'll be able to see in, right? You can always have better vision from up above. They'll be able to see into the house where the wine is being stored, and they'll notice. Okay, so another case. We're going to say it's not just Reshut Harabim, it's things where people pass by and see. What if you cut off the top of the tree and there's no more dates at the top, so no one's going to be climbing that tree to get dates? There's a machloka between the two of them. One forbids and one permits. The one who forbids says, well, why would anyone go up there, right? There's no one who's going to go up there because there's no fruits at the tree. Mandashare, the one who permits, says, sometimes people climb up the tree to look for an animal that got lost. So sometimes you go up there because you want to see something far away, and then when you go up there, you could see into the idolater's house where the wine is being stored, then basically that's like the idolater will be concerned at all times that someone might climb up that tree to look for their animal and see them tampering, right, and opening the wine and offering as a libation, and then they won't be able to sell it anymore. And again, there's always this fear that they won't be able to sell the wine. Now we're going to start a Braita. Before we start this Braita, I'm going to comment, because later the Gemara is going to do this. We're going to split this Braita into two parts. There's the Reisha and the Seifa, the first part and the second part. And within each part, there's two parts. So there's the Reisha of the Reisha of the Seifa of the Reisha, right? There's the beginning of the first case, there's the end of the first case, and there's the first part of the first case, of the second case, and the second part of the second case. Okay, so we're going to get back to that, but that's not so important. It's just going to be important later, so I may as well point it out now. So 4 cases overall, which are really 2 that break up into 4. So I buy or rent space in a shared courtyard with an idolater. So what does this mean? If you remember, if you learned Eruvin and some other sugya where this came up as well, the way they lived in those days where there were a few houses that opened into a shared courtyard. So we have a shared courtyard we have a Jew who puts his wine, he rents a space or buys a space in a courtyard where there's also an idolater. Now here in case 1 and 2, in the first half of cases, we're going to have a case where the wine belongs to the Jew. So the Jew fills up this house that they rented. They don't plan to live in the house, it sounds like. They fill up the house with wine to store it. V'Yisrael darba otach hatzer. Now, in that same courtyard, there's an idolater, and there's also a Jew. Mutal, it's fine. You don't have to worry about your wine. The Jew who put it there. Even if they don't have the key and the seal for the wine in their possession. They don't have to worry about it because the idolater is not going to go into someone else's property in the courtyard and come in contact with the wine when there's a Jew there watching. Turning now to Amud Bet. Bechatzer acheret, this is case 2 of case 1, part 2 of case 1. Bechatzer acheret, but if there's a Jew only living in a different courtyard, there's no Jew living in that courtyard, mutal, it's still permitted as long as as long as the Jew has the key, of the house or the seal in their possession. It's not enough if you don't have that, because then you have to worry that the idolater will go in. But if it's all locked and sealed, it's okay. Case 2. Again, that was case 1, part 1 and part 2. We had Jew's wine, courtyard with a Jew in it, courtyard without a Jew in it. Now you know why this is here, because this is the case of the Mishnah. What if it's the Gentiles' wine, the idolater's wine, where the Jew prepared it to be sold to a Jew, and it's birshuto, it's in the possession of the idolater. V'Yisrael darbo tachatzer, and you have a Jew living in that courtyard. Mutal, right? Now this isn't open to the public, but it is open to the courtyard where there's a Jew living there. Mutar v'hu shemaftech v'chotam biyado. In this case, it's permitted as long as the maftech and chotam is biyado. Meaning the Jew has access to there, which is a little strange, and that's why Amar le Rabbi Yochanan the Tana. Today, Rabbi Yochanan says to the person who brought this braita, now you should read it, even if he doesn't have the maftech and the chotam, the Jew, it doesn't matter, because again, the idolater wants to sell it to Jews, and there's a Jew living in that courtyard, and therefore the Jew's going to make sure that the Jew will tell him the idolater if the idolater goes in there, right, or goes in and touches the wine, and therefore the idolater will not do that. But case 2, part 2 is bechatzer acheret, if the Jew's not living in that courtyard, right, no Jews living there, asur afa pishem maftech v'chotam biyado. Even if the Jew keeps it locked and sealed, there's still a concern the idolater will get in there, break in, open the seal, be able to get into it. By the way, some people think it's maftech or chotam, it's one or the other. Maybe if there's both, some people say that's enough then to protect, but even if, let's say, there's only one, or maybe even both, it doesn't help at all. It's going to be asur. Rabbi Meir has a strict opinion about this. We don't see that anyone disagrees, but Rabbi Meir says this is a problem. Then come Chachamim, who seem to disagree with Rabbi Meir, but we're going to see it's not so really clear. Chachamim oslim ad sheyesh shomer yoshev u'mishamer, or ad sheyavo memuneh habal hakitzim. The Chachamim forbid until there's a shomer sitting there, or someone who comes at certain time intervals. We're going to talk bichlal about Chachamim now. First about to what cases he's referring, and then we're going to try to understand if they come at particular intervals, it should be a problem, because then the idolater knows exactly when they're coming, so we're going to fix that later. Chachamim ahaya, to which case are the rabbis referring? And this is why I specifically said there's case 1, case 2, part 1 of case 1, part 2 of case 1, part 1 of case 2, part 2 of case 2, because the Gemara is going to start dividing it now, because they want to know which of these 4 cases is the rabbis referring to. If you think the last case, case 4 basically, right, case part 2 of case 2, which is there's no Jews living in the courtyard, and Rabbi Meir said it's forbidden, even if you have a lock and seal. Well, according to this, it doesn't make any sense that the rabbis are talking there, because Tana Kamanami Meisar Kasa, Rabbi Meir also forbade it. So the rabbis are saying the same thing as Rabbi Meir. The rabbis are just saying, well, you have a solution by putting a guard up. But Rabbi Meir would obviously agree with that. Ella a reisha de seifa. What if you say the first part of the second case. That's the Reisha, the first part of the Seifa, which is the second case. So of the second section of the Braita. So if you go to the first case of that, which is basically case 3, okay, if we divide it into 4, that's the wine of the idolater, is in the idolater's reshut, but there's a Jew living there. So if you say it's that case, I think I skipped. Sorry, I skipped the line. If you say it's that case, that's the case that Rabbi Yochanan said you don't even need a maftech and chotam. So v'haka amar le Rabbi Yochanan l'tana tunei afa pishay maftech v'chotam biyado. In which case, if Rabbi Yochanan thinks you don't even need the maftech or chotam, then obviously you don't need a shomer there. Okay, if that isn't even necessary, of course you don't need anyone to be watching. Like that's a way farther step than having a maftech and chotam, and even that isn't needed. So it doesn't make sense that the rabbis would jump to forbid and need a shomer. So it must not be that case. Ella, what's left? A seifa dereisha. Okay, now we're going to say it must be the last case of the first part of the Mishnah, which is case 2, which starts at the very top of Amud Bet, which is b'chatzar acheret, right? It's the wine of the Jew, and there's no Jew living there. Mutar v'usha maftech v'chotam biyado. Here it's going to make sense. There, Tanakama said, the Ka'amar Tanakama b'chatzar acheret mutar v'usha maftech v'chotam biyado. As long as, even though there's no Jew living in the courtyard, as long as you have the key or the seal, that works. Chachamim omrim, no, that's not enough. La'olam asur ad sheyesh shomer yoshevu mishamer or ad sheyevo mimuneh haba l'kitzim. You need either a shomer sitting there or someone who comes periodically. Now we just have to fix that periodically part because mimuneh haba l'kitzim griyutem. That's not good. If they come every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, well then the idolater will do whatever they want the rest of the week. So it must be ela ad sheyevo mimuneh she'eino haba l'kitzim. It's until you have a mashgiach coming, right? Somebody coming. Not at any particular interval, just whenever they want. And that would resolve the issue. Okay, now we're going to jump to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, back to the Mishnah. So what we did so far is we dealt first with the issue of if there's not a lot of Jews in the city, right? What about Jews, peddlers who come in, right? And we explained the Mishnah in a particular way. It must be the city has locks on it. Then we said other things that are like Reshut Rabim, okay, as long as you have a window open to the public or you have a reason people would come there, either the palm tree or the garbage dump. Then we quoted this Braita, and then we just had to understand the 4 cases and which case were the rabbis referring to at the end. And now we go back to this Mishnah, to this line that we didn't understand. Reshut Avdei Kochavim Achati. The domains of all idolaters is one. What does this mean? Ibailu. So first I asked the following question. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, lahakel or lachmir? Is he coming to be lenient or strict? Rav Yehuda Amar Ze'eri lahakel, Rav Nachman Amar Ze'eri lahachmir. Rav Yehuda and Rav Nachman had a debate about what Ze'eri said about this. One said he said Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was being more lenient, even though we have no idea what he was being more lenient about yet. In a minute we'll understand that. Or was he being more strict? So let's start with Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda Amar Ze'eri lahakel. Rav Yehuda said Ze'eri was, in the name of Ze'eri, that Rav Shimon ben Elazar was coming to be more lenient. Okay, about what? V'hachi ka'amar Tanakama. This is what Tanakama says. Now, we have to fill in words from the Mishnah because it's not there. We have to understand what they're saying. So, this is what Tanakama said. Kshem shebirishuto asur. Kach birishut ovei kochavim acher nami asur. Just like when it's in their domain, it's forbidden. Also, in the rishut of ovei kochavim acher nami asur. Okay, if it's in the domain of the idolater who owns the wine, it's going to be forbidden because they might touch it. What if it's in the domain of someone else, right? It's unlikely they're going to touch it because that person might, say something and let people know that the person came in and touched it or say, you're not supposed to touch this wine. So also, if it's in someone else's domain, it's also asur. But Tanakama says, no. You have to worry if it's in a different idolater's domain, that it's just as forbidden. Why? Chashinan legomlin. Because there's a concern of gomlin. What's gomlin? Tit for tat. Like you do for me, I'll do for you. Well, if the idolater A and idolater B. So idolater A, it's his wine. Idolater B is watching the wine, right? It's in idolater B's possession. Not necessarily watching it, just it's in idolater B's possession. So if idolater B lets idolater A come in and do a libation, they won't say anything. They'll say, listen, I'll keep your secret. I won't tell anyone because I want to keep open the possibility that maybe one day I'll do this to you, and I'll want to come and do a libation, and I want you not to tell. So they'll make this conspiracy kind of arrangement that if you don't tell, I won't tell. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, now remember his words, Rishut Ovdei Kochavim Achati, they're all one domain. According to this reading, it's going to be a rhetorical statement. What? You think it's all one and the same? It's as if it's in his possession? Of course not. He says, it's only forbidden if it's in the idolater's own reshut. But we're not worried about gomlim. So if it's in the wine, it's in some other idolater's possession, we're not worried about it. That's option one. Rab Nachman what he's going to do is flip the position, because in any case, he never said what Tanakama said. And then instead of saying it was a rhetorical statement, we'll say it was an actual statement. And then we're going to say like this: Hachi Kamar Tanakama. Tanakama is not worried about gomlim. And therefore, it's only Birshuto, which is actually what Tanakama said. As long as it's in the idolater's reshut, but not if it's in someone else, right, gives it to a different idolater. And then comes Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Kol Reshut Ovdei Kochavim Achati. All idolaters' possessions are considered as one, and therefore there's a concern for gomlim. They're all one big family kind of thing, and they'll cover for each other. And Tanya Kavatei Rav Nachman Amar Ze'evi, there's a bright to prove that, to support anyway Rav Nachman's position that it's lahachmir, that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is being more strict and not allowing it and worried about gomlim. Because Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the Braita says that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, Kol reshut ovdei kochavim achati mipnei haramaim. He said because of the concern that they're going to trick us, therefore all their domains are considered like one. And if it's in one idolater's possession and it's someone else's wine, we're still worried that they're going to let their friend in and let them do a libation on the wine. Now we're going to have a story and see if this halacha we just discussed is relevant here or not. Debate Parzik Rufila, Utivu Chamra Gabe Arisayu. So Parzik Rufila, who was this he was a important, prominent officer of the king. Utivu Chamra Gabe Arisayu. He gave wine to his sharecropper to watch. Sava Rabbanan Kamei de Rabbanan. It was wine, obviously, the Jews had prepared, otherwise it wouldn't be relevant. The Jews prepared B'tara. And the question is, are we concerned the Aris is going to let Parzik Rufila in to touch it? Is there an issue of gomlim here? So they're going to say, Sava Rabbanan Kamei de Rava Lamemar. The rabbis in front of Rava said to Rava, listen, we think that Ki Chashina L'Gomlim Hanimile Yechad Kamotiv Hai Gabe Hai. The issue of gomlim is only when one person gives to one, right? And then there's a chance that the other will give to the other. But this sharecropper, there's no way they're ever going to give Parzik Rufila their wine to watch. It would be like a slap in the face to him. He doesn't watch other people's wines. And therefore, there's no chashash l'gomlim, right? There's no way that one's going to give it to Parzik Rufila l'gomlim l'chashina. And gomlim is only when it could go both, right? Each one could give the wine to the other to watch. So this whole issue, we said, is not relevant, which means that we'd be able to trust that the Aris would not allow Parzik Rufila in to check the wine because there's no tit for tat here. There's no way the Parzik Rufila would do it back for them, and therefore they won't allow it for Parzik Rufila. But Amarlu Rabba's like, you missed the point. Adrabah, all the more so in this case. Even if you're not worried about gomlim, even the one who says in that case, we're not worried about gomlim. That's when there's no fear of the person. That's when there's like two equal idolaters. But in this case, the Aris is scared of Parzik Rufila. So Parzik Rufila says, I want to come in and libate the wine. Of course, the sharecropper is going to allow him to, because the sharecropper is scared of Parzik Rufila and also kind of subjugated to him. So, of course, there's going to be a concern that Parzik Rufila touched the wine, and therefore this wine is forbidden. We're going to end with this story. There was a city, Israel, where the wine of the Jew was there. There were a bunch of barrels around. And then all of a sudden one day they saw this idolater right in between all the barrels. And then there was this concern. No, it didn't belong to the idolater at all. But there's a concern, did the idolater do anything here? Rava said, Im nitpas alav kiganav, chamr sharei, v'ilo asur. If it's a city where they'll arrest the person for stealing, then we assume the person wouldn't even dare to touch it, because if they were to touch it, they would be considered a thief and be arrested. But if it's a place where no one's going to arrest that person because either they don't uphold the law or maybe they don't care about the Jews, right? They're happy to let the idolaters do whatever they want to the Jews stuff, depending on kind of who's in charge in that city. Then we have to be concerned and assume that they touch the wine, and then all the wine becomes forbidden. And with that, Hadran alach Rabbi Ishmael, we finish the chapter. So again, to just summarize, before we get to Rashi, which I want to read, there's this Rashi at the end, if you see at the bottom of the daf, after it says Hadran alach Rabbi Ishmael and Rashi, where he summarizes all the different things. Before that, again, we started with this wine that a Jew kind of prepares of the idolater to sell to Jews, depending on where it is and whether we think someone's going to come and see, and all these questions about what case the idolater is trusted and what case the idolater is not trusted, and we have to put up a shomer. And that was the main thing we did today. And part of the daf we already reviewed, so I'm not going to go all back there, and then we just have Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar at the end trying to figure out what exactly his opinion was and on what issue he disagreed with Tanakama. And we had two opposite approaches as to who said what, although it was the same opinion of what they said. And then we ended with this, and then we had the Parzik Rafila story that was an outgrowth of that, and then we ended with this other issue, which was totally different, about whether you have to worry if someone touched a Jew's barrels in the middle of the city. So Rashi, now we're going to read, who summarizes and breaks it up into 6 different categories of cases. Maskana de Milta, the conclusion of what we read is that Maga ove kochavim, if the idolater touches it, kevan shenitkaven liga, it should be oshech sheich, the note says that, since he intended to touch or to move around the wine, even though there was no nisuch, we're still going to forbid it to benefit. And what's nice about Rashi summarizes and tells us from which case do we know this from. We learn it from the Argamadim. If you remember, with the Argamadim who would go inspect the wines, and we forbade it, right? Because they touched it, even though they weren't necessarily touching it for libation, but we're going to forbid it anyway because better to stay away from that. Shelo b'chavana, case 2. What if there was no intent to touch? Kigon lo ikirshu yayin. Okay, he didn't realize it was even wine. So there was no intent to touch wine. Okay, there was intent to touch, but not touch wine. Mutar b'hana'at, that's permitted to benefit, not to eat, not to drink, but yes, benefit. Where do we learn that? Matnitin decharam uvei kochavim. If you remember, there was the idolater who came and touched the wine, thinking it was oil. Okay, so there was no intent to touch wine. Or if you remember the Mishnah about falling in the bore, there was no intent to touch the wine, they just fell in. So that's going to be permitted to benefit, not to drink. Third case, you intended to touch something else, like the etrog case. You're going to etrog to Rav Ashi. You weren't touching the wine with any intent, you touched the wine, but you touched it just to get the etrog out. Umutar bahana, that's also going to be permitted to benefit. Case 4. If you touch it through something else, you touched it with a reed, you didn't touch it directly. But in addition to touching it with something else, we also know that you were doing it for some other reason. This was Rashi, you said you need both. Some people said it was enough just kavanah for something else, even if you put your hand in, like you measured it with your hand. But Rashi understood it, and this is Rashi who says both. You need both. It was with something else, and you intended for something else, like mededo b'kaneh, or hitizu tatzirah, you knocked out the hornet. Mutal bahana. This is permitted to benefit, but again, not for drinking. Where did we learn this? Mimanitim, from the Mishnah. Those were the cases listed in the Mishnah. Case 5. B'chavana v'lo chazina l'may chavin. Now, in the case we just said, we knew your intent was to measure or to get off the hornet. What about we don't know what your intent is, and you touched it with intent? Okay? Asur bahana. This isn't going to be learned from a case. It's going to be learned out from an inference from a case. This is going to be forbidden to benefit. How do we know this? The case happened in Biram. Okay, I'll remind you in a second what it is. This is the case where the guy was coming off the palm tree, and as he was going down, put his lulav into the wine without intending at all. Now here we don't know, right? This was b'chavana. Now that case, he had no intent to even put the lulav in the wine, and that's why it was permitted actually. But but if it was done intentionally, it would be asur, it would be forbidden. So that, right, if you put the lulav in, even though we don't know why he put the lulav in, it would be forbidden. So that's not from the case, from the inference from the case. And the last case, that was case, Those I broke up into two. That was Magal Yidei Davar Acher, where you knew he was intending for one thing or you didn't know what he was intending for. What if a Gentile, Kegon Oruke, they're pouring it, so they're making it move, not by touching it, but they're making the wine move by pouring it. Chiburim, that means attached, right? Is attached to it. Like direct, it's indirect, direct. Okay, they're pouring it, we'll see, as opposed to the next case, which is going to be bizrika, by throwing it. Hikir bo shu yayin asur bana. Again, this splits into two. If he knows it's wine, then it's forbidden. Midur Rabbi Yochanan, who said, Seva chrez al yena mishum yenesach mishum lech lech. Remember, even if he pours the water into it, we're going to forbid this. Lo hikir bo mutar af b'shtiyah. If he didn't know it was wine, then it's permitted even for drinking. And that we learned from the Avodah, the Rabbi Yochanan and ours of Rabbi Yossi ben Norai. Remember, the two of them were sitting drinking, and they asked the guy, not knowing he wasn't Jewish, to pour them the wine. Chad sharei afilu b'shtiyah mishum dovei kochavim lo avayada. And the other one said, right, it's permitted because the Dovei Kochavim must have assumed it was beer. Since he didn't even know it was wine, it's totally forbidden even for us to drink. And the last case, Shalom Chiburim, like Srika, Mutar Af B'Shtiyah Afilu B'Nitzkaven, right? Even if they were intending to do it, right, to throw it, doesn't matter because you can even drink it because Mishum Midirav Ashi Damar Kosh B'Zav Tahol. Right? If you remember, I won't even read the rest, but just like the Zav who throws, it doesn't become Tameh. Also, the idolater, it doesn't become Tameh when they throw it. So throwing the wine is not Tameh. Okay, so that was a summary of at least 6 categories that we saw. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.